Cue the music you hear on Jeopardy when you're waiting for an answer, because we're still waiting to see which one of these 5 candidates will be the next offensive coordinator of the New England Patriots. Bill O'Brien remains the clear favorite. So what is the holdup? That is where we begin our deep dive, and we begin with our Patriots insider, Phil Perry. Phil, I was gone at the end of last week, but from what I understand, most people thought that maybe Friday we would know if Bill O'Brien was going to be the guy or somebody else. And I think we certainly thought that maybe by this time today we would have an answer. It's a little surprising because I think he was their top candidate. So what's the holdup? If Bill O'Brien's their guy, why isn't he their guy yet?
I think Friday might have been a little early. You know, they were still scheduled to interview Sean Jefferson, the receivers coach for Arizona, on Friday. So it might have been a little awkward to just get through that and then immediately name Bill O'Brien the offensive coordinator. But I did talk to somebody with the team, Trenni, who thought maybe over the weekend we would hear something, and still nothing just yet. I think the answer to this, the easy answer to this, is Bill Belichick sort of operates on his own schedule. Now, Bill Belichick even is beholden to the NFL schedule, right? Big picture. And one of the things on the NFL schedule that's coming up that involves his team is they're going to the Shrine Bowl in Vegas later this week. So you would think that he wants the staff set before that, but there's no hard deadline on this thing, Trenni. So whenever Bill Belichick decides it's over is when it's over.
Is it possible that whomever they've chosen, they're just like, anybody who's a contract employee, you're in the middle of contract negotiations, and maybe one of the things you're trying to negotiate with this future offensive coordinator is, hey, you're not going to be a one and done guy. I don't like the idea of that. I know some people are like, hey, if you could bring Bill O'Brien in and if he gets scooped up to be a head coach next year, who cares? He'll fix the offense. Everything will be okay. I don't love that idea. I hope that whomever they sign him to a longer term deal that allows them to really implement the offense here, get some consistency, and really figure out what they have in Mac Jones.
Maybe you'll be able to do that with Bill O'Brien. Maybe you'd get some kind of multi-year deal out of him. But if he ends up getting a head coaching offer elsewhere, Trenni, those are jobs that these guys are allowed to pursue, generally speaking. So I get what you're saying. I just think that line of thinking is in some ways what led to what we saw this past season, right? I think there was some reluctance maybe. I don't know this for a fact, but if Bill Belichick looked at Bill O'Brien last year and said, well, if we bring him on and then he jumps to be a head coach in 2023, then aren't we starting from square one again? Or if he looked at Nick Caley, whose contract was expiring, and thought maybe the same thing and said, you know what? My guy's Matt Patricia. I love this guy. I trust this guy. I respect this guy. I know what he knows football-wise, and I think he can do it. And I also know that he's not going to jump ship in 2023 because he respects me too. And if he knows that's what I want, then he would stick around. So I think that was, in some ways, part of the thinking last year, and it got you into a bind. So I think at some point you just have to determine, where on the sliding scale you fall in terms of consistency versus ability.
Is there any chance that there be just like a gentleman's agreement with Bill O'Brien? Like, hey, man, I didn't pull you from Alabama last year, but could you just promise me that you'll stick around? Or is that really, I suppose that's hard to do, because if you get an opportunity to be a head coach again, you're going to snag it and go.
Right, and those opportunities to go and realize a promotion elsewhere, again, those are things that you're allowed to go pursue. So I would look at this and say, is there a way in which they can set this up? Bill Belichick can set this up where if he does bring in Bill O'Brien, sure, you'd love him to stay for a couple years, but can you at least have somebody behind him who's waiting in the wings who would be ready to go? We thought that was Nick Caley last offseason. Turned out that wasn't the case. Maybe if you're able to keep Caley around, somebody who understands the old Patriot system that Bill O'Brien would be bringing in, then maybe that would make some sense moving forward.
Yeah, maybe the personnel isn't as important as the overall system, and you have someone who's ready to come in and run that the same way. All right, it is time now for the Ford Big Board, built for America, built Ford proud. Bill Belichick not exactly casting a wide net for that OC job. Bill O'Brien, of course, a former Patriots assistant. Clement Jefferson, former Patriots players. Keenan McCardell played for Belichick with the Browns, and Nick Caley, well, he's obviously very familiar with the Patriots because he is a current Patriots assistant, as Tom E. Curran joins the conversation. Curran, I mean, would you like to have seen Bill Belichick go beyond just guys that he's super familiar with? I feel like sometimes, similar to not wanting to repeat the mistakes of last year, Bill Belichick falls into this pattern of keeping everything so close to the vest and so insular that maybe you're not always bringing in the best people.
Well, it's the path of least resistance. And Phil brought this up last week, and I thought it was an interesting observation. And as you poke further and interrogate it further, you see okay, well, Bill O'Brien is obviously almost overqualified for the job. But behind that, for a team that really had an incredibly difficult time and was in some points a laughingstock among the NFL in terms of its offensive execution, none of these guys have been offensive coordinators before. So it really is Bill O'Brien or bust. And I put this out there, and a number of people on social media, Trenni, replied with, well, everybody wants to be comfortable with the people they're hiring. Absolutely. But comfortable while sacrificing perhaps a different way of looking at things or ingesting some new ideas into your ecosystem, as Ted Johnson likes to call it. Maybe that's a good idea. And Phil, you've visited this a lot. Last year, at the risk of losing Nick Caley, because they were uncertain about his leanings after the season, Bill chose comfort, and he chose Matt Patricia. Now this year, it's Bill O'Brien or bust, and if the bust comes, it's comfort.
What's interesting about this is you have an opportunity here with this very open, very public offensive coordinator search. The team has made a statement on this thing. You have an opportunity to bring in people from all over the league if you want, with, in some ways, not a whole lot of intention of hiring them, Trenni. But as Tom mentioned, you can use this as a way to learn more about other teams or how other teams might attack you moving forward. Give somebody an opportunity, a young coach even, an opportunity to get that experience as taking an offensive coordinator interview and sort of helping them along in some way too. But it doesn't all necessarily have to be guys you could be using this to your benefit as well. It doesn't appear like that's happening necessarily.
I'd argue as well that they had plenty of time to cast a wider net, that you could have kept an eye on what was going on with other teams. Up-and-coming coaches talk to people because they knew that this experiment with Matt Patricia and Joe Judge had gone awry pretty early in the season. Well, Albert Breer with an interesting tweet over the weekend. Interesting nugget for you, he wrote. Patriots linebackers coach Jerod Mayo was alongside Bill Belichick for all of New England's offensive coordinator interviews last week. Per sources, good sign of Mayo's growing role within the team. Phil, I know you've been following this part of the Patriots sort of coaching story very, very closely. What are you hearing about Mayo's responsibilities and how they've already changed, even though I don't think the everything's been signed and dotted? Yeah,
my understanding is the deal's not done yet. They're still ironing those details out. I just find Albert's report that Jerod Mayo is sitting in on these offensive coordinator interviews very interesting because, again, we're in uncharted territory here, right? This is not something that the Patriots have done before in terms of a wide offensive wide in quotation marks, offensive coordinator search. And so we don't really know how Bill Belichick would handle them. And I think a lot of people are speculating that, okay, Jerod Mayo looks like he might even be named assistant head coach. Well, what does that mean? Dante Scarnecchia is the only one who's had that title under Bill Belichick. He had it for 13 years before he retired the first time. It didn't really mean a whole lot, other than it was obviously a little bit of a bump in title back in 2000 for a very well-respected assistant at the time. But it was sort of a break glass in case of emergency title. It was if Bill Belichick can't handle the roles of head coach for whatever reason, that Dante Scarnecchia would step in. So when Bill Belichick left for his father's funeral, for instance, in the middle of the season in 2005, I believe it was, Dante Scarnecchia sort of led the day's work that day. I think if Jerod is doing what Albert reported that he's doing now, which obviously we have no reason to believe he isn't, that would signify a role that's even bigger than that assistant head coach role that Scarnecchia had, because he was not involved in trade talks or contract talks or things of that nature. Again, it was sort of a break glass in case of emergency situation. So it's why, Curran, I sort of wonder, is there a little bit more at play here with Jerod Mayo than just an associate head coach title? Because it seems like for him, he doesn't have the experience of a Dante Scarnecchia, or at least not at that point. So this is almost a learning under Bill Belichick, a molding per se. Yes. And, actually, Dante Scarnecchia in 1989 stood in for Dick McPherson at that time. So, to do that job, you don't have to be particularly experienced. You're a substitute teacher in many ways. But this is showing Jerod his world the way Mike Reese back in 2018 reported Bill was going to do with Josh McDaniels. Ultimately, Bill kind of showed Josh the door in not making any effort to re-sign him. But this basically is what consists of it. Here's how you execute an interview of an individual for a coordinator position, Jerod. And everybody needs to learn it one time. Fortunately, Jerod's the kind of guy who probably only has to see it one time to understand it. Very sharp. But this is exactly the molding that would go on. And it's something I talked about. Bill would probably relish the opportunity
to have a guy that he did mold from 2008 until now succeed him. So it's a good sign that there is no discomfort with Bill and Jerod perhaps working in concert.
No, but I wonder if there is some discomfort elsewhere, Curran, because, we've talked before, and I think you've reported that there were times when Matt Patricia was sort of that guy, right? Like he was involved in intimately involved in draft discussions and hiring decisions. And now that is Jerod Mayo. So what does that mean for Matt Patricia's future?
Well, Phil and I have both been on this, Phil, a little bit at the end of last week, and Mike Reese also alluded to it over the weekend, was Matt Patricia is at the end of his contract with the Detroit Lions. The Lions had been paying quite a bit of his offset money under that contract. So now with the contract expires, the chance exists that Matt Patricia could go elsewhere. Phil wrote about this today. Whether or not Matt will be back or not, there's a lot to fall into place. But honestly, to put it bluntly, Matt insinuated himself consistently into situations and got as close to Bill as possible. I think that if he has any hurt feelings, he doesn't deserve to.